Is this on? Oh.
Yeah.
Testing.
You're ready.
Hello. Testing. Okay.
Hey, don't boss her around.
Testing. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay.
July 5th, 2006. I was 13 years old, right out of 7th grade. I just woken up after an evening of 4th of July fun, friends, and fireworks. But this day is memorable for another reason. July 5th was the day my grandma passed away after a difficult struggle with cancer. After this, my grandpa basically lost the will to live and spent his days watching TV, doing crossword puzzles, and drinking. He'd put almost all his effort into his relationship with his wife, so when Nanny was gone, he was isolated and very alone. 2 short years later, my papa was found lying on the floor in his room. He had basically drunk himself to death. Neither of my grandparents was saved. The loss of both grandparents in such a short time and the lack of hope of ever seeing them again in eternity was very hard on my family and me. But God used this trial to grow me and teach me more about himself. After seeing how my grandpa wasted his life, I became determined to not do the same with mine. I resolved that, with the help of God's work in me, I would never let my life become purposeless. This is the main instance in which God has worked in my life over the years to reinforce my belief that everything happens for a reason. Although we may never know that reason or understand why God permits certain things to happen, he allows everything in accordance to his perfect plan for our lives. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." In a tough situation like the loss of a loved one, some may find themselves wondering, is God really sovereign? Is he really aware of everything going on in my life right now? And does he even care? Yes, yes, and yes, even if we don't know exactly why certain things happen. Psalm 139:13 states, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb." God knows each of us personally. He is not just the creator in general, but he created each one of us specifically. Matthew 10:29-30 says, "Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from the will of your Father. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered." Does that sound like a God who is unaware of your circumstances? God has known every single thing about you since the dawn of time. He is definitely conscious of any trials you are undergoing. Not only that, but he allows tough situations to happen because he has a reason, whether you know what that reason may be or not. An excellent example of this from the Bible is the story of Job. Satan saw Job, a righteous man who God had blessed greatly, but argued that Job was only faithful because God had provided for him. So God allowed Satan to strip Job of his children, prosperity, and physical health. Job persevered and did not curse God, even when his wife told him to, and his friends offered discouraging advice. After much grief and pain, God rewarded Job with much more than he had originally possessed. However, Job never knew the reason for his suffering, and it was not unjust for God to keep that information hidden from him. Though Job did not know why he suddenly suffered, he remained faithful to God and was used as a testimony to his wife and friends. Another great example of seemingly undeserved suffering is found in Genesis 37-47 in the life of Joseph, son of Jacob. His 10 older brothers were jealous that Joseph was their father's favorite, and also God had given him dreams that he would rule over his family and that they would bow down to him. His brothers weren't too happy about this, so they began plotting ways to get rid of him. They decided to throw him in a pit, but instead sold him into slavery and convinced their father he had been killed. Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he was made the slave of Potiphar, Pharaoh's assistant. On top of being a slave and being separated from his family, Potiphar's wife lied about Joseph, landing him in jail. But even through these extremely difficult circumstances, Joseph remained devoted to God and resisted temptation. God soon honored his faithfulness when Pharaoh made him his right-hand man. Not only that, but Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, which told that a famine was coming. Egypt was able to store up enough grain so that people came from other countries to buy from them during the famine. This included, of course, all Joseph's brothers who had abandoned him. Genesis 41:6 says, "Now Joseph was the ruler over the land. He was the one who sold to all the peoples of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down to him with their faces on the ground." They bowed down, just as Joseph had dreamt all those years ago. The story goes on to tell how Joseph dealt kindly with his brothers, and his family was restored to him. His brothers sold him into slavery in an attempt to avert God's purpose, but that is exactly what God used to fulfill the dreams he had put in Joseph's mind. And God sustained Joseph through suffering as a slave and in jail, so that he would be later used to save Egypt and the surrounding lands from famine. Everything that God intended was fulfilled, but in a way nobody could have foreseen. In both of these cases, godly people underwent trials even though they had not committed any major sin. However, because of their perseverance and willingness to grow, God used those trials mightily to bring them closer to him. Now, I have not lost all my possessions or physical health, and neither I nor any of you have been sold into slavery by our siblings, but I feel that we can still relate to these biblical examples. My belief that God allows everything to happen for a reason not only sustained me in past trials, but will also remain true for the rest of my life. In every circumstance I encounter, I can trust in God's faithfulness and sovereignty because he's completely in control and completely good in all he does. I know to rely on God's sustenance no matter what, even if I go through something where I don't see what good could possibly come out of it. Psalm 37:5-6 says, "Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday." God blesses those who trust in him through all circumstances in life, no matter how difficult. But some character qualities, such as trusting God, can only be learned through negative circumstances. Wouldn't it be hard to depend on God when everything is going your way and you have everything you need? For me personally, I have never gone through any major trial other than the deaths of several relatives. I've always lived a relatively comfortable life, but I know that when you are stripped of your earthly comforts, this is when you learn to rely on your Savior. The loss of 2 non-believing grandparents in the matter of 2 years would not be viewed by most as a good or an enjoyable experience, and it wasn't. But this doesn't mean it has to be purposeless. Years ago, I couldn't have been able to see the purpose God had in this trial, but he graciously revealed his faithfulness to me through it and taught me to rely on him. For we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, and struck down, but not destroyed. 2 Corinthians 4:8-9. There is no pointless suffering in the life of a believer, but rather we can rest assured on God's promise that every trial he allows in our lives happens for a reason, even if we can't predict its outcome.